Among all the peoples of our planet, it is believed that a man becomes courageous, not by the fact of being born with the biological characteristics of a man. This is not enough. Courage is a special form of strength that must be achieved through overcoming, becoming, and maturity. Today, many students of courage see it in crisis in modern society. If not a decline, then a very painful transformation. In this video, we will talk about the causes of the decay of masculinity, and also try to form a roadmap for those who wish to overcome the unique obstacles of modernity and achieve courage. In the 20th century, scientists drew attention to a disturbing trend. Many adult men, despite their biological maturity, were psychologically stuck at the level of adolescence. They occupied the bodies of adults, but their mental development was hopelessly lagging. The psychologist called this the problem of the eternal boy, and suggested that in the near future, there will be much more such people. Unfortunately, their predictions came true. Most men today suffer from an inability to find their place in life. Many of us live with our mother until the age of 30, choosing life in a soft and cozy corner of an understandable and safe world, instead of going towards the unknown, conquering new heights, and satisfying our ambitions. Instead of creating something of their own, many prefer the virtual world of internet pornography and computer games. Many passively and aimlessly, not even trying to tread their path, wander among the things that come into their lives against their will. In order to understand why this happens, we must dive into history. We are so smart that we are born almost prematurely, and mothers are forced to give birth to us very early. Otherwise, our big heads simply would not pass through the birth canals. Because of this, unlike other animals, the first years of life are spent in absolute dependence on the mother. In this sense, we are unique, but with a big head come special problems. Due to biological characteristics, mothers and fathers interacted with their children differently during evolution. From birth, a woman pays much more attention to a boy. She takes care, initiates physical contact, feeds, monitors emotional well-being, and cares for the future man. This close connection remains in the boy's mind. The mother becomes for him not only a source of nutrition, but also one that solves all his problems. On the other hand, the role of the father, who has been at a greater distance from birth, has always been to provide the child with resources, protection, and, more importantly, direction. And, to be more precise, the role of a man is to help the boy free himself from dependence on his mother and gain independence. Of course, girls also go through the stage of becoming independent. But in girls, interaction with the mother becomes a factor in the development, not in the inhibition of personality. She adopts lines of behavior and begins to imitate her mother. The influence of her mother enhances her inclination towards femininity. She matures organically. The boy, however, requires a different approach. He cannot be satisfied with the mother's example indefinitely and needs a male figure to follow. In most cultures worldwide, the transition from boyishness to masculinity was accomplished during initiation by the oldest males, the cultural bearers of masculinity. Women were not allowed to participate in these initiation ceremonies. For example, in one of the ancient Indian tribes, becoming a man took place as follows. In the middle of the night, the elders, dressed as gods or demons, kidnap the boy. The next time he sees his mother is only in a few months. It is placed in a dark, deep cave, buried underground, or somewhere that symbolizes darkness. This stage represents the death of the mother's paradise and the joys of an irresponsible life. The boy must get out of the cave or dig himself out of the ground, which symbolizes the passage through an impromptu birth canal, rebirth. Been born again, a young man does not fall into the soft hands of a caring mother, but into the harsh world of a renewed life, and goes through a series of difficult trials among men. There is no mother to complain to and no safe house to hide in. After the death of childhood and rebirth into the harsh world of men, the third stage begins. The elders explain the world's laws to the boy, tell him what it means to be a man, and then send him to the forest so that he, fighting for his survival, gains a new status, a man. After several months of the most challenging ordeal, he no longer needs his mother's caress and her forever feeding breast. Such rituals are characteristic of all, without exception, nations who have survived our times. In other words, the people of the past did not resort to such harsh methods for fun. They understood that it was possible to raise a real man, ready to fight for the interests of his people, only through significant losses and trials. The world today suffers from a lack of meaningful rites of passage. Today's boys do not have those very cultured bearers of masculinity, the oldest, ready to pass on wisdom to the next generations. And so the whole burden of this burden falls on the fathers. It is the fathers who today must snatch the child from under the mother's skirt. But of course, not every modern father is capable of this. To do this, he must be independent. So the teenager wants to go out into the world. By his own example, Dad should show the boy that there are things worthy of searching and fighting in this world, for the sake of which it is worth leaving a heated place. Unfortunately, such contact is extremely rare. Samuel Osherson's Finding Our Fathers cites a study that in the Western world, only 17% of men report having a positive relationship with their fathers at a young age. In most cases, the father is physically or emotionally absent from the child's life. And if these incredible statistics are even half accurate, then we live in an era of fading masculinity. Young boys are expected to leave the mother's womb in a warm and sheltered life for risk and danger. And all this without prompting and help from wise men or a father. Few boys can show such will. As a result, the mother takes over the father's role. She has to be torn between two roles. Her gentleness and love are accompanied by rigidity and authoritarianism. She simultaneously protects her son and tries to push him out of the nest, which causes her great suffering. Of course, despite her efforts, the mother often shows excessive guardianship, creating a dependent, weak, and lack of initiative. Women are guided by their son's safety, men by his independence. A teenager without a father, living under the dominant influence of his mother, grows into an eternal boy with an absent desire for glory, strength, and courage. He is afraid of the cold and rude world that refuses to understand him and remains forever dependent on the support and approval of women. His aspirations aim not to achieve heights, but to ensure that his beloved girlfriend gives him a smile or a body. Of course, the influence of the family and the absence of initiation rites are not all. The young boy also attends school, where he meets children raised similarly. At school, he is taught to obey women from the state apparatus, and growing up, he goes to the university, where such a line of behavior is finally fixed. Where else can a guy go for a good example? As a result, young boys avoid difficulties and immerse themselves in a world where everything is under control, where he is under the protection of first the mother, then the teacher, and finally the state. However, man cannot discover new oceans unless he dares to lose sight of the shore. So now we will talk about how to acquire this courage. Let's take a look at the psychology of the eternal boy. First of all, he needs more determination. Often he spends his life drowning in fantasies, sorting through hundreds and thousands of options for potential success. He starts one thing, then switches to another, then another, and so on. Sometimes things end in his mind before they even start. He plans something all the time, but never fully begins to fulfill his plans. In other words, the eternal boy is not bound and does not seek to tie his existence to one thing. The prospect of a choice that the boy cannot reverse terrifies him. He likes to stick to the status quo until the right decision comes from somewhere in the outside world. He justifies his inaction by saying that the time has not yet come to do something and forgets that only he determines when it will come. However, the inability to choose one's path is only a symptom. The main problem is that the eternal boy needs to consider the outside world worthy of his attention. He subconsciously compares all prospects with the heavenly cocoon of maternal care. Of course, nothing can compare with this beautiful world. Comparing harsh reality with the ideal world of childish, carefree life, He begins to look for excuses why this or that matter is not worthy of his attention. And of course, he finds them very quickly. However, one day he will still have a choice, and he will either fall into the abyss of weakness or begin his journey into courage and a higher form of being. This path is complicated and thorny, especially for those who walk it alone. On it, the boy will have to discard his childhood illusions, accept reality as it is, and understand that even in its darkest corners, there is gold waiting for the one who is his will find. The boy himself must organize and carry out the initiation into courage. In other words, he must outgrow the child and become a hero. Unlike a teenager, the hero bravely plunges into the unknown, welcomes difficulties, and considers fear a harbinger of his greatness. The hero's journey begins with work. Without conscious, systematic work with discipline, vast amounts of teenage energy do not go into a productive channel, but are locked in an immature mind. A young man faces himself, and all this energy does not find an outlet, but only intensifies internal conflicts. He argues with himself and the world, sometimes throwing out aggression on those who least deserve it. Labor becomes a form in which the natural aggression of a teenager acquires its meaning. Work is like an anchor that can be thrown into the outside world to weather the inner storm. Anyone who plays sports knows what peace of mind, what emotional calm accompanies us after a workout. The work does the same, but its influence is much more profound and systematic. If the effect of training passes after a few hours, then the work penetrates the soul and settles there for a long time. At the very beginning, what kind of work you will do is unimportant. The point is to do something heavy carefully and consciously finally. The first thing to worry about is the availability of labor. Whether you like what you do or not, labor must be seen as a necessity. You should treat him respectfully even if you work at McDonald's. Treat work with respect. That is the main factor. Think of it as hardening, preparation like life in the forest. It's unpleasant but necessary. The one who looks with displeasure and contempt at the work he has to do, instead of proudly accepting it as a challenge and doing it perfectly, constantly returns to his mother's skirt. He looks like a schoolboy who doesn't like school and doesn't even know what will happen next. Take advantage of this to become stronger, cultivate insensitivity, and silently walk away when it's time to move on. Among all cultures, work is the main thing associated with courage. Becoming a hero always begins with personal autonomy. It is necessary to minimize dependence on other men and, more importantly, women. Among the people of Mekinagu, a man is expected to wake up earlier than others. While the rest are still sleeping, he is already working when the consumers of his labor are only having breakfast. Among these Indians, laziness is considered equivalent to impotence since they are equally sterile. The fruits of courageous labor do not go to satisfy selfish needs. In almost all cultures, courage goes hand in hand with help and support. Men give so much that it may seem they are engaged in self-sacrifice. This is possible because strength development drives a man. He is eager to manifest his will and not to furnish himself with the attributes of an allegedly present choice. He values the process, not the result. He conquers the world around him not to own it, but to transform it and pass it on to others in an improved form. Even though the boy runs away from commitment and devotion to one thing, this is exactly what he needs. He knows that the achievement of courage, regardless of the chosen path, is a matter of storm, trial, and struggle. His next step is to set foot on this path. This path passes along a very steep way, walking along which every man stumbles and falls. The fall, however, should never become a decisive point for a man, but a sign and a call to collect all the anger, aggression, and direct his will to reach the top. He must give himself entirely to the cause and learn independence, generosity, and kindness to obtain the freedom he desperately desires. Honor and good luck. See you soon.